Welcome back. We're talking with a Democratic Representative Jim Himes from Connecticut. He's a member of the House Financial Services Committee, a former banker at Goldman Sachs. And I want to open up the conversation to Peter Cook, my colleague in Washington, because I know, Peter, you have a question for the congressman.
I do, Congressman. Thanks for the time this morning. I took a look at your bill, and I want to ask you sort of a bigger question, picking up on what you were just talking about before the break. Your bill targets only those financial firms receiving TARP funds, but we get a sense from hearing Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner that the Obama administration would like to overhaul compensation for the entire financial sector, again, as your bill does, tying it more to performance and to risk management. Why do you stop only at the TARP firms? Don't you think that given what's played out in the financial crisis, the whole sector might need an overhaul here in terms of compensation practices?
Yeah, and of course that's a much bigger and much more complicated topic, right? Very few people disagree that for TARP recipients, those firms which took taxpayer dollars, that we have a very legitimate interest in controlling compensation, making sure that it's reasonable, making sure that it's performance-based. When you talk about the broader industry, on the one hand, absolutely, there's no question that part of the reason we are where we are today is because compensation structures across the industry were one-way bets. You know, if you as an executive or as a trader took a huge bet and it went well, you got paid richly. If it went poorly, you lost your job, and 3 months later you were working across the street. But that's a very, very complicated topic, and frankly, you know, it's the shareholders of our companies who at the end of the day have the main interest in making sure that compensation is, look, the people who do well with respect to compensation, but that it's done based on long-term consistent performance rather than the trade that you did last Monday. And how the government interacts with the private sector on that very important question is really complicated and needs to be done well, because the last thing we want to do, it sounds funny to say it now, but is to see this industry completely disappear from the United States and not hire our people, not pay taxes in cities like New York. So we need to be very careful and thoughtful about that larger question.
And, Congressman, is the government any better at determining what constitutes excessive risk than these firms themselves?
Well, I think that, again, you know, the bill we introduced today is just saying let's take last week's actions and make them advance the discussion, make it smarter. Let's get some discussion going around this concept of compensation based on performance, which is something that I think most people are very comfortable with. This bill would ultimately ask the Treasury and some of the regulatory agencies to create guidelines for the question of what is excessive. This bill, I think, has some healthy elements to it in that it says you can still receive restricted stock, which of course is stock that is delivered in the long run based on you sticking around in your firm and performing well. So it's not the last word on this discussion, but I think it's a big step forward relative to where we were last week.
Congressman, it's Eric Shasker again. I want to jump in. I have to ask you a question about Goldman Sachs. You used to work at the firm. You know Wall Street really well. Goldman maneuvering, let's say, to try and get the TARP money paid back possibly by the middle of next month, creating a lot of concern that maybe it'll leave an unlevel playing field with the other firms that receive that money. What's your view on whether Goldman Sachs should or shouldn't be allowed to pay the TARP money back so soon?
Well, there's no question, I think, that that firms that are in good shape, that are stable, that are profitable, and let's remember, a lot of the firms that are in the TARP now went in not because they had to, but because Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson asked them to go in so that the TARP wasn't a stigma on a particular set of weak firms. So as a matter of principle, I think it's important that firms that would like to get out of the TARP because they don't like whatever set of restrictions come with that TARP or because they don't need the money should be allowed out. On the other hand, let's remember, the TARP at the end of the day is very cheap money, so we'll see, you know, which firms ultimately decide they don't want that cheap money and which ones do.
All right, very good. Congressman, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Some insights into whether Goldman Sachs should be allowed to return the TARP money. We also talked to the congressman about the bill he's sponsoring to try and tie executive pay to performance and risk management on Wall Street. That, of course, only for recipients of the TARP money.